There's something about being alone at home that can either feel like the ultimate comfort or the beginning of a nightmare. Maybe it's the creak of a floorboard when you know no one else is there, the shadow that seems to move in the corner of your eye, or the feeling that someone or something is watching you from the darkness. Today on Creep, we're diving into 4 terrifying stories of people who found themselves utterly alone, or so they thought. These are tales of solitude turned sinister, of quiet nights interrupted by the unexplainable, and of eerie moments that will make you think twice about being home alone. Lock your doors, dim the lights, and prepare yourself, because these stories might hit closer to home than you'd like. This is Creep, and these are 4 chilling tales of being alone at home. I never considered myself the type to get scared easily. I had been living alone in my small suburban house for a few months, and everything had been perfectly normal until that night. It was a Friday evening in late October, and I had decided to spend the night enjoying the peace and quiet. The neighborhood was always so calm. Nothing ever seemed to happen here. I was curled up on the couch, half watching a movie while scrolling through my phone. It was around 10 p.m. when I first heard it, a soft tapping sound, faint but deliberate. I paused the movie and strained my ears to figure out where it was coming from. At first, I thought it might just be the wind rattling the windows, but the tapping continued, steady and rhythmic. It was coming from the living room window. My heart skipped a beat. My living room blinds were closed, but the thought of someone or something standing just outside sent a chill down my spine. I stood up slowly, trying not to make a sound, and approached the window. My hand hesitated over the edge of the blinds. Part of me didn't want to look, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, won out. I pulled the blinds back just enough to peek outside. At first, I saw nothing, just the darkness of the street beyond. But then my eyes adjusted and I froze. There was a man standing there, his face inches from the glass. He was wearing a tattered hoodie, and his features were partially obscured by the shadows, but I could make out his eyes, wide, unblinking, and staring directly into mine. For a second, I thought I must be imagining it, but then he smiled, a slow, crooked grin that sent a wave of terror through me. I stumbled backward, letting the blinds fall shut, and tried to catch my breath. My mind was racing. Who was he? What did he want? I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but before the call could connect, I heard it again, the tapping. This time, it was louder, more insistent. I forced myself to look again, but he was gone. My relief was short-lived, though, because just then, I heard a faint scraping noise coming from the back door. I ran to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I checked the locks. They were secure, but the sound continued, like someone was testing the door, trying to find a way in. I grabbed a knife from the counter, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear myself think. I called 911 again, and this time, the operator answered. I tried to explain what was happening, but my voice was shaking so much that I barely made sense. They told me to stay on the line, and that an officer would be there soon. Minutes felt like hours as I stood there, clutching the knife and listening for any sound. Every creak of the house made me jump. Finally, I saw the flashing lights of a police car pull up outside. The officers searched the property, but found no sign of the man. They reassured me that it was probably just a drifter passing through, and that he was likely long gone. But the look on their faces told me they didn't entirely believe that either. I didn't sleep at all that night, and for weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I installed security cameras, double-checked all my locks, and even considered moving. But no matter what I did, I couldn't forget that smile or the sound of that tapping on my window. I've never liked storms. They've always unsettled me. But living alone in my little house on the edge of town meant I had to deal with them whether I liked it or not. That night, the weather forecast had warned of severe thunderstorms, and they weren't kidding. The rain started around 7 p.m., a gentle patter against the windows that quickly grew into a deafening roar. By 8, the wind was howling, and flashes of lightning lit up the darkened sky like strobe lights. I had just finished cleaning up after dinner when the first flicker of the lights caught my attention. At first, it was just a quick dimming, barely noticeable. But soon, the light started to pulse, growing dimmer and brighter in an erratic pattern. I stood in the kitchen, staring up at the ceiling, half expecting the power to go out entirely. Instead, the light settled into a faint, unnatural glow, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. The house felt wrong. I tried to brush it off. It's just a storm, I told myself. Power lines are probably unstable. But something about the way the lights flickered didn't feel random. It was too rhythmic, almost intentional. I decided to check the circuit breaker in the basement, just to be safe. Grabbing a flashlight, I made my way down the creaky wooden stairs, every step echoing in the dimly lit space. The basement was cold and damp, the kind of place you didn't linger in unless you had to. The circuit breaker looked fine, no trip switches or anything unusual. But as I turned to head back upstairs, the flashlight started to flicker. "Great," I muttered, tapping it against my palm. But then it went out completely. I stood there in the pitch-black basement, listening to the storm rage outside. The only sound was the faint drip of water somewhere in the corner. I felt a chill run down my spine, and for the first time, I realized just how quiet it had gotten upstairs. When I finally made it back up, everything felt different. The air was heavier, almost suffocating. The lights in the living room were still flickering, but now there was a strange, low humming sound coming from somewhere in the house. I froze. The humming grew louder, resonating through the walls, and then it stopped. That's when I saw it. The shadow. It moved across the wall, impossibly tall and thin, its shape shifting and twisting as it passed through the flickering light. It wasn't mine. I was standing completely still, and the shadow was on the wrong side of the room. I grabbed my phone, desperate to call anyone, but the screen wouldn't turn on. It was dead, even though I'd charged it fully just an hour ago. And then, the lights went out completely. I stood there in the darkness, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. For a moment, the only light was the occasional flash of lightning through the windows. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something else. A faint glow coming from the hallway. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. Slowly, I forced myself to move, creeping toward the hallway. The glow was coming from the end, near my bedroom. When I reached the door, I hesitated. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and get out of the house. But I didn't. I pushed the door open. The glow was coming from my bedside lamp, which had somehow turned itself on. But that wasn't what made me gasp. There was a figure sitting on my bed, its back to me. It was hunched over, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, as though it was listening to something only it could hear. I stumbled backward, my foot catching on the rug as I fell to the ground. The figure didn't move. It just sat there, perfectly still. And then it spoke, not in words, but in a low, guttural sound that echoed in my chest. The lights flickered back on for a brief second, and in that flash, I saw its face, or what was left of it. Empty, hollow eyes stared back at me, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. I screamed. The next thing I remember, I was outside, standing in the pouring rain. My neighbors found me on their porch, soaking wet and shaking. They called the police, but when the officers checked my house, they didn't find anything. No figure, no strange lights, nothing. They said it was probably stress or a bad dream brought on by the storm. But I know what I saw. I sold the house a month later and moved to an apartment in the city. I haven't been in a storm since without thinking about that night, and sometimes, when the lights flicker, I wonder if it's still there waiting. It was supposed to be a quiet night. My parents had gone out to dinner, leaving me alone in the house. I didn't mind. I was 17 and used to being on my own. I planned to spend the evening gaming in my room, maybe watch a movie later if I felt like it. The house was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. It was a normal evening until I heard it. The faint sound of movement coming from the living room. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. I paused my game and sat there, listening. Nothing. Shaking my head, I laughed it off. Maybe it was the house settling, or the wind outside. But then I heard it again. It wasn't just a random creak this time. It was distinct. A soft, shuffling sound, like someone walking across the carpet. My chest tightened. I told myself it was nothing, but curiosity got the better of me. Grabbing my phone for light, I slowly opened my bedroom door. The hallway stretched out before me, dimly lit by the nightlight plugged into the wall. I walked toward the living room, my footsteps quiet on the hardwood floor. When I got there, everything looked normal. The couch was where it always was, the coffee table undisturbed, and the curtains drawn. I stood there for a moment, scanning the room, waiting for anything to happen. Nothing. Feeling a little ridiculous, I turned and went back to my room. I had barely sat back down at my desk when I heard it again. This time, it was louder. Footsteps, clear and deliberate, moving down the hallway. I froze. My bedroom door was open, and the hallway was just out of view. My heart pounded as I strained to listen. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. No response. I got up slowly, every nerve in my body on edge. Peeking out into the hallway, I expected to see someone standing there, but it was empty. The house was eerily quiet now, except for the distant sound of thunder from an approaching storm. I closed the door, locking it this time. Sitting back down, I tried to focus on my game, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then came the crash. It was so loud that I nearly jumped out of my chair. The unmistakable sound of plates and glasses shattering echoed from the kitchen. My stomach twisted into knots as I stared at the door, too scared to move. I had to see what had happened. Grabbing the closest thing I could use as a weapon, a baseball bat leaning against the wall, I unlocked the door and crept toward the kitchen. The hallway seemed longer than it ever had before, and my hands were trembling as I tightened my grip on the bat. When I reached the kitchen, the sight made my blood run cold. The plates and glasses my mom had left drying on the counter were shattered on the floor, broken into dozens of pieces. It was a mess, shards scattered everywhere, but the room was empty, no sign of anyone. I checked the back door. Locked. The windows? Locked. There was no way someone had gotten in or out. Standing there, I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe one of the plates had fallen, knocked the others over somehow, but the way the pieces were spread out didn't make sense. It was as if someone had thrown them with force. I cleaned up the mess as best as I could, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. When I finally finished, I went back to my room and locked the door again. For the rest of the night, I stayed under my blanket, phone in hand, jumping at every little sound. My parents came home around midnight, and I debated whether to tell them, but in the end, I didn't. What would I even say? That I'd heard footsteps and seen broken dishes, but no one was there? They'd just brush it off as my imagination or a fluke of some kind. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw, and I'll never forget how I felt that night, lying in bed, too scared to close my eyes. Whatever happened, I couldn't explain it, and maybe I don't want to. I've never told anyone the full story of what happened that night. Not my family, not my closest friends. It's something I've tried to bury for almost 2 decades, but sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat, the memories crashing back like a tidal wave. It was 2005, and I was 24. I had just moved to a small town in Nebraska for my first teaching job. The town was quiet, almost too quiet, but I liked it. It felt safe, or so I thought. That Friday night, I was grading papers late. By the time I looked at the clock, it was close to 11 p.m. My tiny rental house was at the edge of town, surrounded by open fields. It was peaceful, but it also meant there weren't many neighbors around. I had just finished a cup of tea when I noticed it, the sound of gravel crunching outside. My heart skipped a beat. Nobody ever came by that late, and I hadn't been expecting anyone. I turned off the kitchen light and peeked out the window. There was a car parked at the end of my driveway, its headlights off, barely visible in the darkness. I felt a chill run down my spine. I told myself it was probably someone who'd taken a wrong turn or had car trouble. I waited for them to knock or call out, but they didn't. Minutes passed, and the car just sat there. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I grabbed my phone and considered calling the police, but what would I say? There's a car outside my house. It sounded ridiculous. Then I heard it, the sound of footsteps on the gravel. They were slow, deliberate, heading toward my front door. My pulse was pounding in my ears as I crept toward the door, trying to stay quiet. Whoever it was, they didn't knock. They just stood there. And then the doorknob started to turn. I froze. They were trying to get in. Panicking, I locked the deadbolt, even though I was pretty sure I'd already locked it earlier. The sound of the lock clicking must have alerted them that I was inside, because they stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then came a soft knock. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you," a man's voice said. It was calm, almost too calm. "I'm having car trouble. Can I come in and use your phone?" I didn't respond. He knocked again, a little louder this time. "Ma'am, please, it's cold out here. Just for a minute." Every instinct in my body screamed at me not to open the door. "I'll call someone for you," I finally said, my voice shaking. There was a pause. Then he laughed, a low, unsettling chuckle. "That's okay," he said. "I've already got what I need." And then I heard the sound of footsteps, multiple sets of footsteps. There was more than one of them. I backed away from the door, heart racing. I could hear them moving around the house now, their boots crunching on the gravel outside. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on one of the windows. I spun around to see a man's face pressed against the glass, grinning. "Let us in," he said, his voice muffled but menacing. I don't know how I didn't collapse right then and there. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator what was happening. As I gave her my address, the banging got louder. They were trying to break the windows now, laughing and shouting things I couldn't make out. The operator stayed on the line, telling me to stay calm and that officers were on their way, but it felt like forever. Finally, I saw the red and blue lights reflecting off the walls of my living room. The men must have seen them too, because they bolted. By the time the police arrived, the car was gone, and so were they. The officers found footprints all around the house, and they pointed out something I hadn't noticed before. A second car had been parked in the field behind my house. They told me it looked like the men had been planning this, that they'd probably been watching my house for days, maybe weeks. I moved out of that house the next morning and never looked back. To this day, I don't know who they were or what they wanted. All I know is that I was lucky, so lucky that they didn't get inside. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the sound of gravel crunching outside my window. And there you have it. 4 chilling tales that remind us how truly terrifying the world can be. Sometimes, The scariest monsters aren't lurking in the shadows or haunting our dreams. They're real people, real moments, and real threats that catch us when we least expect it. If these stories kept you on edge, don't forget to hit that like button. Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Creep for more tales of terror, mystery, and the unknown. We post new content regularly to keep you questioning what's out there and what might be closer than you think. Thank you for joining us tonight. Sleep well if you can. Until next time, stay safe, stay alert, and remember, sometimes the scariest thing isn't the unknown, it's what's just behind the door.